Good morning, everybody.
Diarmuid, can I just do a sound check? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, sure. Good morning, Dr. Long. Good morning, Dr. This is a complicated name. Dr. Diarmuid Briain?
Briain.
Briain. Yes. Good morning, good people. We can hear you well.
Good.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, Olive. Hello, Aisha.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good
So,
morning.
yeah, we're just reminding. Hello, Olive. How are you?
People are saying Chogabirwe. So when you say Olive, they will get lost.
Sorry, but the Chogabiri one is complicated. You decided
I
to
want
choose
people to learn how to pronounce it. Okay.
All right, so we're just waiting for other colleagues to start to join in. We should be able to start in a few minutes. So, Olive, you will guide our next course of action. You are the commander here. You know who registered, how many people registered, and when we raise a good quorum to start, we should be able to start. You can let us know.
Thank you, JB, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar. A number of people registered, but I realized the flyer was communicating 10 a.m. East African time. So I think that's why many people are joining now. I want to suggest that we can start now on the program. I thank you.
Okay, that is fine, Olive. Good morning, everybody. Let me see. Dealing with some background issues here. Okay, so sorry about my poor lighting. You're welcome to this month's workshop, the NEMRA workshop. My name is Imokola John Baptist, and Olive has requested me to moderate today's session. I teach at the Department of Journalism and Communication at Makerere University, and I also teach journalism at Nkumba University, another university in Uganda. So this morning we are going to talk about the relationship between the PhD supervisor and the student, and we'll be getting insights from our two guests and then the panelists. And as is the norm, later on, we will have some time to share experiences and ask questions and learn from one another. But usually the NEMRA tradition is that we don't just start talking without thanking the Almighty and asking for the guidance, his guidance in this meeting. So I'll request Princess Chogavire to lead us with a very short prayer, and then we start off our conversations. Olive, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Imakola. This moment, I ask colleagues here with us in the seminar that we humble ourselves for a short prayer. Dear Lord Almighty, we want to thank you for the gift of life. We want to thank you for today. We want to thank you for NEMRA. We call upon your mighty hand to be amidst us, to guide us throughout this session. Lord, thank you. Bless our presenters, guide them, bless each and every participant, and even those who are about to join us. We thank you, Lord, because you have already done it. In the name of Jesus Christ, I have prayed and believed. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Oli, for that prayer. And members, just to look at our program, is that we're supposed to start at 10. But then after the prayer, we will have very brief opening remarks from the leadership at NEMRA. Then we will have something to say about the biographies of our speakers today. And then we have the presentations and the discussion from the presenters and the panelists, which will take us up to around 10:15. And then from then we will have question and answer session where we'll be able to share with each other. And then we will have closing remarks from the head of training at NEMRA. So that is how our program is going to run. Now, Princess Chogavire, I don't see Dr. here, our MD yet. What would you suggest? Do we start off and then we'll have him later, or we ask Dr. Gad Rozaza to welcome us to the meeting?
The MD is here actually. Hello, JB.
Hello.
Good morning, JB, and good morning, everyone. Actually, the MD is logged in as NEMRA.
Oh, my apologies. So sorry about that. You're most welcome, Doctor. I apologize. So it is now time for you to welcome our presenters, our panelists, and the participants to this March workshop.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe for introductions sake, Dr. Karl Max Rutaro. Dr. Karl Max Rutaro teaches biochemistry at Makerere University, but also doubles as the managing director for this wonderful organization called NEMRA. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Doctor.
We do thank you really for joining us today for this wonderful and insightful seminar titled The Pivotal Role of the Supervisor-Supervisee Relationship. As an MD, it's an honor to welcome all of you, including our distinguished presenters, panelists, and all the participants. I can see the list talks of about 22, about 80 people had registered. But all in all, we are glad that the 22 are here. As NEMRA and NEMRA leadership, we recognize the effective supervision, the power of effective supervision in shaping the professional and personal growth of individuals, especially in academia. Today's discussion is particularly timely as the dynamics and the landscape of the supervisor-supervisee relationship play a critical role in fostering success, collaboration, and innovation in various fields. We all know this. As NEMRA, we are privileged to have experts, Dr. Sheila Long and Dr. Briain, today, who will provide their valuable insights and share their experiences on the subject. Additionally, our panelists, Mr. Alfred Ocaka and Mr. Conrad Ekiisa, will offer their perspectives as PhD candidates, and we know this will enrich the discussion. I encourage all of us and everyone here present and those yet to join us to actively engage in today's seminar so that we cultivate and nurture the vital relationship. Maybe before we begin, I also want to take this opportunity to thank NEMRA and NEMRA team and our esteemed colleagues, especially Ms. Choga, for ensuring that this seminar is here today. We know it has had to take a number of changes in topics here and there, but we are glad that we are here and we are going to share on this exciting seminar today. On behalf of our colleagues, the entire NEMRA headship, we promise that this is not the end and it has not been the start. We've always had these seminars. Dr. Briain, Dr. Sheila Long have always been part of NEMRA training, and we really cannot take that for granted. So I need to say at this moment, because I may not get an opportunity later towards the end, that Sheila Long and Briain, we thank you and we thank SETU for being our institutional member from the North. I know you have got a bigger, wider network at SETU. Kindly please extend our thanks to your team there, that as NEMRA, we appreciate the support given to us. Ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity to welcome you once again to this seminar, and I now hand you over to the moderator so that he can guide us into the next program. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you very much, Dr. Rutaro, for those very good remarks and welcoming us to the session today. I also will not take a lot of time, but to introduce our guest speakers today. So we have Dr. Sheila Long from the Department of Humanities. She's a lecturer in the Department of Humanities at SETU, with a very, very vibrant and strong academic background. Her biography here is very, very long, and if I said everything about her, we might be here up to tomorrow, and our Muslim colleagues might announce that tomorrow is Eid when I am still reading her profile. So I'll just say that she's an experienced researcher, a PhD supervisor, and an educationist, a very, very strong academic from what I see from her profile here. And then after she speaks to us, we will also hear from Dr. Briain, who is a chartered engineer with over 30 years of industry experience in the telecommunications. A very big profile as well, professional profile, a lot of research, a lot of PhD supervision. Again, my apologies, doctors, that I am not able to break down everything for the purpose of time. So we'll dive into our conversation now. But before we do, I want to tell you a small story, very short story. So Dr. Rutaro and myself teach at the same university that in this country is known out there for having very bad supervisor-supervisee relationship, leading to students delaying in the system. So recently we were told by the directorate that we have thousands of PhD students who are stuck in the system, some of whom have been there for more than 10 years without completing their PhDs. So when I started mine, I was supervised by both colleagues, both supervisors were colleagues in the department, one very senior and a little bit, one of them a little bit younger. So when I started my work, at some point I got stuck and I wasn't proceeding with the PhD. So the senior one called me when I was in Michigan. She put airtime and called me and gave me a lecture for 45 good minutes, saying, how are you going to fail to do your PhD and then you come back and you're standing before other students and you're telling them to work hard? You're going to shame our department. So somehow she woke me up and I said, you know what? I must do this. And then towards the end, when she saw that everything was falling in line, she would always compliment and say, we are moving, we are going to get there, everything is okay. So I got the carrot and the stick from the same person at the same time. And thank God it managed to get me to the end of the journey. And so when this topic was shared, I was very excited that we are going to share these experiences. But now as a new PhD supervisor, I'm just starting with my first student who is developing the proposal. It's really important for me to learn from this. How do I deal with other students now? Because Dr. Long, you are an educationist and experienced in this field. The challenge that we have is sometimes in this part of the world is that you finish your PhD, you don't have any induction, you don't have any training. As soon as you're done, people say, oh, thank you very much. Now you are done. Here are students, we must work. So I look forward to benefiting from this session a lot in that regard. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to delay you with a lot of my stories. I would like to welcome Dr. Sheila Long as the first speaker to make her presentation. And then after that, we will continue with the rest of the program. Dr. Long, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John Baptiste. John Baptiste. And I also want to thank Dr. Rutaro and Olive and all the other members of NEMRA. Can you hear me okay? Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes,
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so I can then say good morning in Rotoro. So Oliota, everybody. I spent a little bit of time in Fort Portal, so I still remember my Rotoro from a couple of decades ago now. And I also want to also make the connection with Makerere University. It's very close to my family's heart. My uncle, in fact, is a graduate of Makerere. In the late 60s, I think he was games captain, Firozali Tijani. There is a photograph of him, in fact, up in Makerere, I believe. I have yet to see it, but he has found it. So I love that I have a family connection with Uganda as well. So Dermot is changing the slides there, so he might just change on the slide a little bit. Yes, there we have it.
Sorry.
The next one maybe. Yeah, thank you. So just by way of background, and thanks very much, John Baptiste, for the very generous introduction to myself. I'm an academic focusing on children's rights in the Department of Humanities. So international children's rights is my background. And you can see my education is a little bit interdisciplinary. I have a social science background with a little bit of international relations as well. And my doctorate was in children's rights. I also have studied in East Africa, which I find that to be one of the best experiences I've ever had, which was in the State University of Zanzibar about 2 years ago, where I studied advanced Swahili and a little bit of Arabic as well. So I understand some of the challenges of universities in East Africa as well. I have work experience in Rwanda, Uganda, Lesotho and Tanzania. So about 4 years of experience as a volunteer and as a development worker, mostly in the area of education, particularly early education and non-formal education for street experienced children. I'm currently double jobbing, as all of us are. So I am a lecturer, but I also coordinate partnerships and scholarships and programs with universities in East and Southern Africa. So opportunities that we might have to collaborate with universities perhaps in Mozambique or in Ethiopia, in Uganda like yourselves, or in maybe Kenya. So we try to keep the relationships strong, whether it's through an institutional membership like NEMRA or direct partnerships with universities and ourselves. So I like the role that I take, which is that relationship, keeping the relationships going. As Olive has just typed in, she's just reminded me that I'm not Dr. Sheila. While I'm here this morning, I'm Dr. Abwole. So that's my Impaco from Portal that I'm very proud of. So that's it. So without further ado, I'll get moving, and I'm just going to walk you through some of the literature really on the
Sheila, do you want to? I just said the next slides were actually the introductions for myself,
okay.
Conrad, and do you want to do that
so
first?
if you want me to do the introduction, we'll do that.
Fine.
So if you move it back, then we've just sorry, I'll
go back to here.
We've just changed our agenda a little bit. So Diarmuid was to do our introduction, but I'll introduce Diarmuid. Is that okay, Diarmuid? I'll introduce you.
Away.
And I'll also introduce our two PhD students, Conrad Ekiisa and Alfred Ocaka, and they are going to be discussing their personal reflections on their experiences of their own PhD journeys. And for Diarmuid, it will be his PhD journey from in Uganda and his now current role as a supervisor. So if you want to switch on to this, perfect. This is Conrad. So Conrad is joining us from Uganda. He's currently in Kampala. Conrad is a PhD candidate in ENGCOR. His background is in telecoms engineering at Makerere, and he also has an MBA from the Quantic School of Business and Technology, and he has experience as a technical support engineer in Dell. He is currently undertaking his PhD supervised by Dr. O'Briain. This is Dr. Diarmuid O'Briain. He's the head of Department of Electronic Engineering and Communications. His background is in computer networking, telecoms engineering, and his PhD is in telecoms engineering. He also has an MA in teaching and learning. He's currently a lecturer, and he's also spent some time as a lecturer. He's previously been a lecturer in SETU, but he's also worked as a lecturer in CDAT in Makerere University in Uganda, and Diarmuid will go through his PhD during his presentation. And then finally, we have Alfred Ocaka. Alfred is joining us from Ireland. Alfred is a PhD candidate and research fellow in ENGCOR, which is our engineering center, research center. His education is telecoms engineering from Makerere, so we have strong connections with Makerere University, as you can see, and IT cyber security engineer is his background, work experience, and also working as a monitoring assistant for the World Food Programme. So Alfred is also joining us today. Okay, so thanks, Dermot. So we're about to get stuck in then onto this section that I am going to focus on, which is, first of all, really to ask us to think about ourselves as supervisors, because I loved what John Baptiste said, which is basically how we get our PhDs and then we are expected to take on students, oftentimes with very little training. So the role today is to consider what we sorry, my power was just about to go. I just got it in the nick of time. We're going to consider basically the training that we probably might need ourselves as supervisors, and also to think about the supervision that we experienced ourselves as supervisees. So that's a double pivot, I suppose. We're going to look from both perspectives. So the first question is to ask yourself as supervisors or as potential supervisors is, why do it? What's the function? What's the benefit for you? And I know some of you are saying it's in your heads, it's because we're asked to do it. It's expected of it, but really there's lots of benefits for being a supervisor. First one is really that you get the opportunity to foster research and to really nurture new talent in your area of expertise. Another area is collegiality. This is where you build up that sense of cooperating between colleagues in pursuing what we would see as the higher goals of education, the cooperation and the benefit of sharing resources and furthering the field. Another great fruit of becoming a supervisor and embarking on that journey is all of the connections you make. So you make so many connections through forging and building connections with other experts, having external examiners maybe for your students' projects, meeting other external examiners, and networking nationally and internationally like we are doing today. And then also for your own research profile, you get opportunities to really deepen your expertise and to get your expertise really known outside your country. Oftentimes this is where you get your international exposure as well. So opportunities to become external examiner. The more PhD students you have, the more competitive your bio is on your grant applications, and then of course opportunities to become a scientific peer reviewer on journal articles, and papers and book chapters. So you're building your profile as a researcher by supervising your PhD students. So there's a lot of benefits for the supervisor. Then on the other side of the coin, then for students, so what might be the benefits for students? So I've taken this very plain, I suppose, list from our own standards in Ireland. And these are just a list of why be supervised. So I suppose, to develop your research skills, to develop your ethics and social understanding skills, to develop your personal effectiveness skills. And there's so many transferable skills that comes from a PhD that we oftentimes don't really capitalize on. So I think that third point is something that maybe we can all discuss maybe in the final part of the presentation on questions and answers. Developing teamwork and leadership skills. So all of these are the byproducts in some respects of this big project. You're developing communication skills and you're developing entrepreneurship and innovation skills. And again, these are maybe something we can discuss more. They're aspirations. Maybe we don't always think about them in this way. So those are some of the reasons why a student would want to be supervised. Now, you might be asking yourself, is there a mismatch between expectations? What's the ideal and what's the reality? And I know some of you have mentioned that in the past, you know, in Uganda, as elsewhere, you know, there is there can be difficulties with the relationship, and I suppose the main thing, the main message I'd like to get across is that you know, the supervisor-supervisee relationship can make or break the PhD student. They can make or break the PhD student's success. So this relationship is actually very, very vital. And what we don't want is to have a situation of what's called benign neglect, where, you know, you think that by being a supervisor and just letting the student get on with it, that's enough. So I think it's maybe one of the key take-home messages from today will be that really thinking that that all of us will need a little bit more input to become supervisors than just our own PhDs. So Dermot, if you could change to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, thank you. So basically there hasn't been much on doctoral supervision since only starting really in the late 1980s. So you're not going to find a whole lot of research previous to that. And one piece of research that I'm going to zone in on today is Anne Lee. Anne Lee developed a framework for approaching supervision. And this is the framework that you're going to see over and over again in the literature being mentioned and being discussed. And one of her more recent pieces of research really emphasized the need to develop supervisors through courses, through mentoring, through awards. You know, for example, an award for the best supervisor, the best you know, nominations from students. But this is all a relatively new area of academic staff development. So having a suite of training for supervisors is still relatively new. So this might be an area that NEMRA could consider developing for their members. So we will move on to look now at Lee's framework. And this is her framework. There is 5 areas in it and 5 domains. And really, I suppose most of us will have one or two dominant styles that we take, dominant approaches. So by the end of these slides, I'd like you to reflect maybe on a couple of questions. First of all, supervisors' own concept of supervision is really important. So what is your own concept of supervision before we even go into this framework? And then the second question I'd like you to reflect on is, what was your experience of being a student or being a supervisee? And what do you think the style was that your own supervisor what was their own particular style? So that might be 2 questions I'd like you to think about as we go through this. So yes, the first approach. So we have 5 approaches. Oftentimes the functional approach is the one that it seems to be the one that is by default the approach that many of us take, and many of us take it thinking this is the best approach, this is the only approach, and this is enough. But I'd like us to kind of consider the other approaches as a way of expanding and addressing some of the issues that students may encounter in supervision. So a functional approach is basically a very strong project management approach, and it's probably the one that's quite common in, you know, inexperienced supervisors. In many respects, they take this approach and think that might be enough. So in this case, you will provide lots of explanation to the students, lots of direction. You're going to be, you know, setting out the stages for the student to get through, to follow direction. It can be quite rigid, but oftentimes you're following the rules and regulations of your institution. So you're following through on stages and on agreed processes. Typically, a functional approach will outline that there's 4 years to be completed in a PhD, and you will have expected milestones to reach in that. in that model. So that can be okay in and of itself. However, there's lots of disadvantages from a very purely functional approach. So some of the disadvantages might be around rigidity. So it can be very difficult for students to consider creating new knowledge if they are taking a very functional, if the supervisor is taking a very project management approach. So we'll move on to the second approach that Lee has identified, which is enculturation. And enculturation also happens when we are supervising students. It mightn't be as dominant, but it's there. And this is where the student is encouraged to become a member of the disciplinary community that you belong to, whether it's engineering, whether it's social work, whether it's social science. You're basically bringing the student on a journey to cope with their it's a journey of personal growth, basically, where they are, you're facilitating them through support, mentoring, and coaching, but also challenging them too. But you are enculturing them into a new community. So the values of this would be that it encourages standards, it encourages good participation, identity formation, and community formation. So the student becomes part of a community. But some of the disadvantages of this enculturation approach is that there can be low tolerance of internal difference or internal diversity. Moving on to the third approach is critical thinking. And I think when I think of my own supervision, I think my supervisor took a very much a critical thinking approach. So critical thinking is where the student is encouraged to question and analyze their work. And this is a good approach to take. The students learn right from the start to question and ask questions about their research, to question the underlying concepts, the frameworks, to look for gaps in knowledge, to look for gaps in boundaries and methodologies. Basically, the supervisor is taking, a viva defense approach right from the start. So they're really training the student to defend their work. The disadvantages of this approach, and as somebody who experienced it, it can feel harsh. It can feel quite harsh. It also suppresses students' creativity as well. It can depersonalize the process, and it can feel a little bit harsh for the student, particularly when they might need a little bit more encouragement or development of relationships. The fourth one is emancipation, where the student is again brought through a series of stages, but comes out quite independent at the other side. So this approach is really about personal growth and helping the student to cope with change. Some of the disadvantages of this emancipation approach could possibly be benign neglect, that neglect I spoke about, that students are left a little bit too much to their own devices, or also that, maybe a toxic mentorship relationship could develop. So, in all this approach, you have to be very mindful of the relationship and making sure that relationships are positive between the supervisor and supervisee. Then finally, relationship, and a relationship-based approach is also one of the domains identified by Lee, and this one is very, very vital, I would say. This is where the student gets a sense that they are cared for, that their supervisor is also a person, and that they themselves are important. So the supervisor in this situation needs a lot of emotional intelligence and flexibility, because the student is also looking for approval. The student at this stage, especially in the early stages, are looking for approval. So you're not setting out to be friends with the student, but you are, I suppose, you're there for them, not critiquing them too early at, especially in the early stages, but, being very flexible. And this is sometimes where you'll get issues in supervision, where there is a mismatch in supervisor and supervisee, where maybe a student needs a relationship and it's not there. So this one is something I would ask everyone to really consider about that relationship piece. And then some of the disadvantages, I suppose, of this one is that there is potential for harassment, abandonment, and rejection. So within any relationship, I suppose that's true for everything. So we have to also be aware of that. Okay, so thanks, Dermot. Can you just move on to the last slide? So this is my last slide. So basically, I would just ask you to have a consideration of your own particular approach. So functional is there. That's the whole project management piece is always there. It's there in the background, but then there's these other domains that are also there. We can't be strong on all of them, but we're probably strong on one or two others. So typically from the research, engineering would not typically be strong on the emancipation approach or relationship development. Social science, on the other hand, would be much stronger on emancipation and relationship development, and not so much maybe on the functional side. So that's what research is showing, just taking two examples there. But yeah, I would like to finish with just these two questions really for yourself, is to ask, what approach did I experience myself as a supervisee? And then what approach am I trying to develop in myself as a potential or current supervisor? So thanks very much for your time. And I am passing you over now to one of our students, Conrad.
All right. Good morning. Just make sure I'm coming through, all right?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly.
Brilliant stuff. All right, good morning. So there was a bit of an introduction there about myself. I happened to be in Kampala. There was a bit of a mix-up. I thought I would attend in person at Chesawan or University. I haven't been there myself, but Google Maps messed me up and led me into a swamp. So I happened to be joining the call from my car. So Sheila has presented a good introduction as to how supervision is approached. And I just wanted to share a bit of my reflections as a PhD student pushing to finish my PhD. And I've categorized them into the 3 points on the slide there. What I've learned, a couple of the rewards from this journey, and a couple of the pitfalls as well that have come with undertaking or partaking of this journey. So the first bit there is through the 4 years, and I'm actually a little over the 4-year mark now. I am about 4.5 years in at this stage. PhD is one of those journeys where you're going to heavily learn to self-correct. Yeah. One of the approaches that Sheila mentioned there was critical thinking. And a functional approach as well, where the PhD is approached from a project management perspective. Now, one of the interesting things with a PhD is that rarely will you have very clear direction on exactly what is expected of you from the PhD. So within that process, you're going to be iterating a lot, doing this, learning, maybe taking one approach, learning that, all right, maybe this isn't exactly the right approach to take, or this has already been done, or something in that line, and you have to correct yourself again. So that's definitely something that came out pretty strong from this 4-year journey. I think the second bit there as well is, how do you make a plan without a clear idea of the destination? I think that's really quite very well defined in PhD. You're not going to have a clear idea of specifically where the destination is. If we were to use an example, if you are going to, I don't know, maybe with street, Barrow Street, maybe Barrow Street somewhere in Carlo. That's a specific idea, but that's a specific destination. But you're in Uganda. Where do you typically start from? How do you get there? It's something that you are going to have to learn. And I have found that the best approach to take this is one with what I like to term as sprints. So you have very small milestones that help you achieve a broad sort of blur, high level destination, yeah, or goal, if we had to put it that way. And that's something that came out pretty strongly for me. And thirdly, you're working with a lot of data, and some of the things that slowed me down, believe it or not, is midway in the PhD, around my second year there, I happened to have got an issue with my laptop and lost all my data, and I had to go through it again. Now, generally speaking, if you've done something before, the second time will generally be easier. So it's just one of those things from a life perspective, but it costs you a bit of time. And believe it or not, time flies when you're doing a PhD. It's just because there's so many other things that you're having to balance left and right as well. It's not rarely will it be a single case of you only doing the PhD. Generally, it won't be like that. So it's good to have backups for your backups as much as you can. Just moving on there to some of the rewards I feel I have gotten from taking this journey is excellent problem solving skills. I think anyone that's done a PhD will immediately distinguish themselves when they are put in a room and they're asked to work on a problem. It's the way you approach a problem, the way you are able to self-critique and come up with logical conclusions. Your conclusions are evidence-based. You don't rely heavily on assumptions, or you rely on educated assumptions. Small things like that make such a difference, and they move one out into the real world. So, for example, in my role as a technical support engineer, I'm constantly working on problems. And this approach to methodologically approaching a problem feeds right well into my day job. So that's a great reward that I had from the PhD. Secondly, is just sheer resilience. PhD is hard, and by the time you're done with this journey, you'll be freaking exhausted, and that's just a fact. But you're going to have to push yourself. You're going to have to really push and persevere, within this journey. And when you come out on the other side, you realize that human beings are capable of a lot of things if you decide to put your mind to it. So that's a reward I think I am happy to go home with at the end of this journey. The third bit there is learning how to learn. How do I explain this? In my 4-year journey, I have learned so many things, and I have unlearned so many things as well. Recently, in my latest work bit, I was taking an approach to solving a particular problem, and somewhere down the line, I'm like, all right, this is a good approach, but it's taking me way too much time. So I'm going to have to change or pivot completely to try out something completely new. And how do you learn a new skill quickly enough, to apply it, because you're running short of time? So through this journey, I have picked up a number of little techniques here and there of ways to learn and learn fast and to unlearn as well. And what you find yourself coming out with at the end of this then is first off, a very strong critical matter base, what I term as a critical matter base, just the underlying knowledge that you have that allows you to easier learn other concepts. So for example, if you're a telecom engineer, it's easier for you to learn maybe programming. For example, if you came from a networks background, it's easier for you to learn programming. You have a bit of a critical matter base there to approach a certain new skill. So that was one of the strong rewards for me. Now, moving on there to the pitfalls, I think I want to mention one that isn't often talked about, but it's quite serious. especially from a PhD perspective. Now, generally, most of the times when you are doing a PhD, you'll be around that age in your life where you have a number of relationships in your life. There might be romantic relationships. Maybe you have children that you're taking care of. Maybe you have extended families or families that depend on you. Social relationships as well. These are all going to be constrained during your PhD journey. Now, it doesn't start out initially, but as you get closer to the finish line, more is demanded of you. And because of that, you have to forego, because there's only so much a single individual can do at the same time. So a PhD takes a very strong strain on your various relationships, and this is something you need to be aware of, especially as you get closer to the end. It's good, and one of the ways to manage this is just set the expectations and manage people's expectations. Let them know what your typical day looks like. Let them know what you're currently going through, what you're working on, why are people not seeing you. Sometimes someone might send me a message and I reply after 3 or 4 days. People usually say I get back after 3 or 4 working days. I would not reply to messages over the weekend because you're trying to rest and all. But over time, they get used to it. Some relationships will fade out completely. Those that I suppose are strong enough to weather the storm shall. And those will generally be the more meaningful ones. Secondly, we must appreciate that a PhD is one of the hardest things you're going to do. Just from an educational perspective, a PhD is really challenging. It's going to challenge you in a number of aspects. And I suppose that's why the reward is a title that stays against your name for life. Yeah. And it's sort of a reward to that hardship that you've had to endure. So I wish I was prepared mentally for how hard it would be, but I don't know how I would tell somebody that's starting a PhD how hard a PhD is going to be. I'm not sure how I would share that with them in a way that they would understand it. So it might be one of those things that you sort of see along the way. You get to truly appreciate along the way. But from my experience and from probably anyone's experience and understand a PhD, they will appreciate that. If you want to be a PhD within the 4-year mark, it's going to be challenging, especially if you're having to balance other things. If you have work that you're doing, or if you're trying to earn a living on the side or support a family, it's really going to be challenging. So those would be my personal reflections. Over to you, Sheila, there.
Thanks very much, Conrad. That's really good to look at it from your perspective. I'm going to take a different perspective now, because I'm going to look at doing a PhD where I'm not doing it at home in my home institution. I'm doing it away. So at the time I was doing my PhD, I was actually physically in Uganda. And I'm going to talk about the challenges that brought to doing a PhD. And I suppose initially I'll just introduce myself and what my background to getting into the PhD was. I come from a military communications background. And then I worked with US multinationals for a couple of years, from 1996 up to about 2009. And then from 2009 up to 2014, 15, around then, I was working for a company called Ripplecom, which is an Irish internet service provider, where I was the chief technical officer. During that time, I had done an MSc by research in telecommunications. And in 2014, my wife, Anya, was appointed to the embassy in Kampala as head of development. So she was going to spend a lot of time in Karamoja doing work, but also in the embassy in Kampala. So we were tasked to go, or she was tasked to go to Uganda for 4 years. So I tagged along, and I got a job in Makerere University as a lecturer. I was working in CDAT, and at the same time I was doing a PhD. So I applied to do the PhD in SETU. It was then called IT Carlow, but it's since merged with another institute and became SETU in 2022. So I applied to do the PhD in a technology called software-defined networks, which is a telecoms thing, let's say. And because I was going to be doing it in Uganda, that created a bit of a stir, because that wasn't something that was common in the university at the time. And the registrar at the time was a man called David Denif, who came on my supervision team, because he felt that there needed to be a stronger supervision focus, because I wasn't actually going to be doing the PhD in Ireland. I was going to be doing it in Uganda. So a team was formed with Dr. Yvonne Kavanagh, who was basically the chair of the team, if you like, and Engineer Dr. Dorothy Okello. She's assistant professor, Dr. Okello now. She's the dean of the School of Engineering in CDAT, and the three of them operated as a team, really, for my supervision. And I'll talk a little bit more about that team in a moment. So what was I doing? So my PhD was really around 4 parts. The first thing was that I was doing the PhD sort of 2014, 2015, I was starting, and the internet had only arrived really in East Africa in 2009. So if you look at the diagram there, that purple line, that cable going down and linking to Mombasa and Dar es Salaam, landed in 2009, late 2009, from CECOM. And that was the first fiber connection of East Africa to, in fact, it was the first fiber connections of anywhere in Africa outside of South Africa, which got connected in 2003 to the internet as such. So the interest for me was, how was the last region of the world to get the internet? How was that region? How did it perform in those first few years? Just to put scale on things, I have a map of Ireland there, and I show 2 lines going into Lake Victoria because, well, with a very big hammer, you could bash Ireland into Lake Victoria from a size point of view. So it just gives you a scale of, you know, Ireland on the edge of Europe, and where it fits in the geographic size, let's say, of East Africa. And that as well was a surprise to me, because I needed to do this. I needed to work around the region. So I chose not to do the whole of East Africa. I chose to take out what I called the sub-region, which was the part of East Africa that had the most impact by the internet in that period, that being Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. So I called that the sub-region. And if you look there, you can see a comparison of internet penetration for that region at that time. You can see, compared to the rest of the world and to the world in general, East Africa did okay, but the sub-region of Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda did really well. It was up there with the rest of the world, and much higher than the rest of Africa. So how did that happen? That was what interested me. So I did a political economy study that involved getting in buses and going from, you know, Kampala to Nairobi, going meeting people that were involved in internet development over those years in Kenya, doing the same, going to Rwanda. I went to Tanzania. So I did a lot of busing around East Africa to do that particular political economy study. To be honest, it wouldn't have been something I'd have chosen to do. I'm much more of a technical person. But Yvonne Kavanagh, who was the chair of the supervision panel, had said to me, look, you really do need to do some of this. This is a PhD now. It's not just a technical work. And she'd have known I'd been quite happy writing code, or, you know, making telecoms equipment work with each other and coming up with new ways to do that kind of thing, the more technical stuff. But she said, look, on the PhD, it's much more rounded. You have to actually get out there and talk to people, and you've got to have a wider view of things than just the pure technical. And I suppose she got that because she knew what I had done in my master's, and my master's was quite technical. So she was looking at what can you do beyond the technical. So this was it. And I'll put it like this. At the time, I wouldn't have been very comfortable doing this kind of work, going out talking to people and trying to pull all of the thoughts of all of the people that I spoke to together into a political economy study. I've since did it on an MA, and I was much more comfortable doing it on an MA after. But at that time, I wasn't that comfortable doing that, but I did it. The next part of it, what I did, was I rebuilt the Uganda Internet Exchange Point. So you can see on the left picture there, the Uganda Internet Exchange Point was pretty miserable effort in 2015. It was basically a number of companies that shoved in bits of equipment and connected to each other. And the throughput was really, really low. You can see that on the graph there. I know it probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but there was very, very little throughput going through. It was really in megabits of traffic, very, very low levels of traffic. So I rebuilt the Internet Exchange you can see the stages there where it was being rebuilt. I know Conrad is very familiar with it. He worked in the Internet Exchange for a period as well, before he came to Ireland. But you can see we pretty much got logarithmic growth in traffic between 2015 and 2019 during the period of my PhD. And you all know what happened in 2020. We had the COVID outbreak, and had that Internet Exchange not been rebuilt and put in place, it would have been a very, very different situation from, during COVID, trying to keep people access to the internet, particularly around Kampala. So it was very, very important that Internet Exchanges became essential during the COVID outbreak. So that was part 2. Part 3 was I developed my own Internet Exchange, a software-defined Internet Exchange. This was trying to minimize the amount of hardware that was required in the Internet Exchange. And I had a particular reason for building this. So, I mean, the Internet Exchange that was built in Kampala at the time was, there was some software in it, but it was pretty much hardware intensive. What I wanted to do was try to break that down into as little hardware as possible, because in the 4th section, I wanted to create what was called a distributed Internet Exchange. The idea being that there would be a central core in Kampala, and that you would be able to have mini exchanges in different parts of Uganda. And that was the idea there, was to try to look at a way of addressing spatial planning, because as you know, in Uganda, and it's actually the same in Ireland as well with Dublin, they become a monster, really. Everyone starts to live in Kampala, and you find that Kampala ends up being half the population, or maybe it's not half, but it's 30% of the population of Uganda are all focused in Kampala, and that's not good for spatial planning. And I know that the UN goals are to try to reduce that amount of dependence, let's say, on one central place, because what happens is we get development of slum areas, and you get development of, poor outcomes for people. So it's better if we could push economy out to other parts of a country, as in the case of Uganda, push things to Gulu, push things to Mbale, Jinja, wherever, Kabale, push it away from Kampala, so Kampala doesn't become, this critical mass of everything. So that was the ultimate aim, was to develop that, which I did. Okay, so what are the lessons then from it for me and in general? Well, the first thing was remote supervision is different. Okay, it's basically it was a challenge. And in fairness, the university at the time said, yeah, look, we have to figure a way around this particular challenge. So it's a complication of geography. I lived in Uganda. I was working in Uganda, but I was doing a PhD in Ireland, and there needed to be a complementary team put together that was able to help me with that supervision task. So the chair, as I say, was Yvonne Kavanagh. She was the academic in Ireland, if you like, and Dorothy Okello then being the academic in Uganda. And really, I don't think I could have been successful had I just had a supervisor in Ireland and doing remote updating to them. I needed the support of a supervisor in Uganda as well. And it was good also to have David Deneve there, who was the registrar at the time in the university, because he was looking at let's say the policies and procedures that are around doing a PhD, and how that tied into what was the norm, let's say, in SETU, where I wasn't actually doing the norm. I was actually away in Uganda doing this PhD. So what did that mean for them? So the 3 of them had to have regular communication and regular meeting, and had to work as a team of 3. So I know if you think about rugby, football, or soccer, or any sport, the referee isn't just refereeing the game on their own. They're refereeing it as part of a team with the touch judges and the television match official or whatever. So in this case, it's the same. There was a team of 3 that had to work together. So Dorothy came over to Ireland, and she spent a week with Yvonne and with David. And it wasn't just doing that. She was also she was an adjunct faculty for SETU at the time as well. But what one major part of that was discussing that team of 3 and how that would operate during my PhD. So I had to visit IT Carlow yearly to give an update and do a presentation on how I was performing and what I was doing. So I would visit Ireland once a year, and I would go and I would actually present to Dave and to Yvonne and to the wider community as well within the engineering faculty in Ireland. So I did that. So that was part of what I had to do to basically bring the work that I was doing in Uganda back to my home institution. I also had regular supervision by Dorothy in CEDAT, and Dorothy was amazing. She was just so good to work with. She knew when I needed support, and she was there to give me the support when I needed it. But she also knew when I didn't need support. So that was most of the time. She was saying, you know, go away. But sometimes I would have to bounce things off her and say, look, I'm going to, you know, Rwanda next week to do this part of it, and you know, any ideas, and she'd have known somebody there, and it was, you know, it made she would make some phone calls or whatever and sweeten over my trip there to Rwanda, and same thing with Nairobi, etc. So she was fantastic as a support, you know, a kind of a support to have when I needed her. But she also, you know, as Conrad said, you know, the supervisor has to be a bit tough as well. You're doing your PhD. It's your journey as a PhD, but you do need support sometimes. It's not really possible to do it all on your own. And that's the support that I got from her locally. So I also benefited from the cross-cutting modules that are being taught at the Directorate for Research and Graduate Training in Makerere. As a Makerere employee, I was a lecturer in CEDAT, so I was able to benefit from attending those taught modules. And there were some fantastic ones on, you know, on R programming for doing my statistics. There was advanced research methods. There was lots of fantastic modules that were ran from there. And also the African Doctoral Academy, which is a joint, or was, I presume it's still going, but it was a joint venture between Stellenbosch University in South Africa and Makerere University, where they sent people up to Makerere, and down in the Senate building, they ran training for, you know, as part of those cross-cutting modules. There was also a module ran by the Swedish University of Agriculture, which was really, really good as well, around statistics. So if you're doing a PhD, make sure to take, if you're involved at Makerere anyway, and I presume it's available probably to other people that are doing PhDs in Uganda, make sure to benefit from those cross-cutting modules that the Directorate for Research and Graduate Training run in Makerere. They're really, really good. So yeah, I suppose the key message for remote supervision, there was a link between Makerere and SETU that supported me doing my PhD, and I thought that link was very, very important. So the other thing is that you're part of a community, and you can feel very, very lonely on a PhD at times. I felt very lonely at times on the PhD, but when you stop and think about it, you're actually part of a much wider organization or wider team that are supporting you. First, you have your supervisors, and they're there to support you, or should be there to support you anyway. And if your supervisor isn't being supportive, then get another supervisor, because it's really important that your supervisor is there to support you. So when you need help, you can get it. But it's really, you have to know when to go and look for that support as well. It's not up to the supervisor to come and, you know, I suppose, act as a total crutch for you either. They're there to actually support you when you need support. But it's your PhD, and you're doing, you know, an advanced academic, you know, experience, and therefore you're supposed to lead it. The supervisor is not leading you. They're there to make sure that you're following the rules, so to speak, but to offer support when you need it. So I was very lucky. I had a very supportive team, particularly with Dr. Okello and Makerere, very, very supportive. I was doing an internet study, so I was going across East Africa doing an internet study, which was basically speaking to people that were involved in internet development over that 5-year period from 2009 up as far as, well, 5-6 years as I was doing that. It was 2016, I suppose, I was going around doing that. And I also did a wider internet survey with, you know, as part of the African Internet Exchange Organization. I did an internet survey as well, so that had a wider African view of things. I had to thank as well Mr. Kyle Spencer, who is the kind of the manager, if you like, of UIXP from the management point of view. I was the technical operations, he was doing the management of it, so he was very, very useful. And Helen in UCC was brilliant as well. UCC gave me some funding towards the development of it. They found what I was doing interesting, and they gave me some funding around equipment and that. So I did have a lot of reporting to do for that money, but Helen was really, really good in UCC for that. And on top of that, when I came home in the evenings, my wife Anya was very, very supportive as well. She was good to tell me though that when I got back to Ireland, I better have my PhD finished. You have 4 to 5 years here in Uganda. You're going to have to finish it while you're here, because when you get back to Ireland, you have to get back to the day job, so to speak. So it was good as well to have that a little bit of push as well to make sure that I was going to meet the deadline. So I was supported by UCC financially, and also they gave me support as well because we had the internet exchange in their premises inside in Kampala. I was a lecturer in the College of Engineering, Design, Art and Technology, and of course Dorothy is the dean there for engineering. Directorate of Research and Graduate Training were very supportive with the cross-cutting courses, and the African Doctoral Academy, which is Stellenbosch, and the Directorate of Research and Graduate Training together also doing supportive cross-cutting training. So if you're doing a PhD, use the training. It's well worth doing. So Lois was president of the NEMRA at the time, and she asked people to do quote about how NEMRA was involved in their experience. So NEMRA started off when I was, maybe a year into my PhD, and I saw a notice for it, and I went down. I saw it on the internet, I think, and I went down to one of the first meetings actually, which was down on Nakasero Hill there, in a restaurant down there one Saturday morning, and she spoke about her experience. She was going to Sheffield University, I believe. She had graduated from a PhD there, and she wanted to look at this whole idea of supervision and the differences she saw in supervision from an African point of view and from, say, European point of view that she had in the UK. And I suppose I benefited in that I was coming from an Irish university, but I was doing my PhD in Africa, and I was very lucky because Dorothy, did not, I suppose, typify some of the problems that Lois had seen with supervision in Uganda, and I was really lucky with that because she was very, very good. But she asked, they started running, I suppose, short cross-cutting courses and some, short networking events to get people who were of a similar similar journey, if you like, together. And that's the part I really got out of NEMRA. I liked going to those meetings because I was sitting with other people who were on a similar journey to me, doing a PhD, a little lonely perhaps, doing their PhD, and that I was able to, I suppose, emotionally connect. And as an engineer, I'm not too good on emotions, right? But to emotionally connect with other people who are sharing the same problem as me, trying to go through a PhD, and how we could help each other, even if it was just emotionally, with our journey, because we were all doing quite different things, I suppose, in our PhD work, but we were on a similar journey. So she asked us for a quote, and that was the quote that I gave her at the time. She was doing that at the time with a number of people who were members of it. So I think it kind of summed up for me what I was doing on that PhD and what it was for me. And that's basically my journey, if you like, doing a PhD in Ireland and Uganda. So I'm going to hand over now to Alfred Ocaka. By the way, Conrad, who you heard from already, and Alfred, both of those were students in Makerere University. When I was lecturing there, they were doing their undergrad training in Makerere University at the time. And when I moved back to Uganda, from Uganda to Ireland, and I got working in SETU and on a full-time basis when I returned, some opportunities came up for PhD work, and the two gentlemen applied for them and have been great, PhD candidates within the university. They've been the university, they're loved within the university, to be honest. They're very, very good. They've been putting in time, helping others as well. And I've been very proud to supervise them through their journeys in their PhD journey in Ireland. And, let's hope next January they'll both be graduating with PhDs from SETU. So I'll hand you over now to Alfred for his experience.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Diarmuid, Sheila, and Conrad for the great presentation. I'm just going to share my personal reflections throughout my PhD journey. So when I first began my PhD, as most of the PhD students, you're always very curious, right? Very ambitious. You're having the big plan, the big goal. You want to contribute significantly to academic fraternity and so forth. So always in the early stage, you feel that every small success, it was more like a breakthrough, right? And always brings a lot of excitement in the early stage. However, that excitement always doesn't last that long when you begin to understand the challenges associated with research and also the challenge associated with PhD. So, of course, there are a lot of early challenges that always you face when you're doing your PhD. And one of the challenges that you begin to realize that PhD is non-linear. So there's no linear path from path A up to path X or Y or Z. So you always move in a zigzag path. And of course, that comes with a lot of challenge. And for example, when you're just starting your PhD, you're always not so much well conversant with your area of research. So you always do a lot of literature review. And there's always this cascading effect where you read one paper, takes you to 5, 7, and those 7 takes you to 30, 40. And because of that rabbit holes, if you're not so keen, you can easily deviate from your research topic or research questions. And that always brings some kind of imposter syndrome. You start reviewing a paper and you look at the complexity, you start questioning, how did these authors came out with all this? And of course, because of that, sometimes you feel, you might not be good enough. But all that comes because you have just joined the PhD and you don't have much skills in that area. And of course, as you go along, you always develop some kind of a coping methods, a coping strategy that allows you to navigate through all these challenges. Of course, you develop resilience in the process, and that allows you to navigate those early challenges that are associated with PhD. And of course, as you go along, you will start working on conference papers, journal papers, and so forth. And that shifts you from becoming just a learner to a contributor. Now, in all these steps, supervision plays a very key role from the initial stage up to the final stage. And of course, we always have a lot of misconception when we first join our PhD about supervision. And one of the misconceptions is that we would think our supervisors are our instructors, giving us instruction what to do, maybe within the week or within the month. And that's a very big misconception. They're just there to guide us, but not to instruct us. And also, in some cases, initially, we might think that our supervisors, they are our problem solver, that in a way that if you have any question, they have all the answers, okay? And that is also a very big misconception. And sometimes we would think that our supervisors are more like our academic GPS that will guide you through from the beginning up to the final destination. And it's also a very big misconception. And as you go along, you begin to understand that supervision is more of mentorship, right? It's not more of management where they're managing you, they're giving you instruction what to do. But it is quite surprising that they will not give you instruction what to do, but they will tell you what not to do, which is quite intriguing. So maybe if you have submitted a paper, they would revise the paper and advise, you know what, these are things that you don't need to do, but they will not first tell you what you have to do. And of course, in that process, you always get a lot of feedback, critical feedback. And some of this feedback are either positive or negative, and both positive and negative always builds you and makes you better. And of course, in supervision, there are a couple of roles, right? Like strategic planning and support. Sometimes you might want to go for a conference, and for you to go to conference, there are lists of requirements that has to be met. And of course, your supervisor will always be there to support you anyway. And I think I was lucky enough that when I was joining my PhD, I had a very high level goals, what was expected. But of course, those were high level goals. The low level goals, you always navigate through. And of course, we always have structured meetings with Diarmuid, with my supervisor. And that was really very key in my journey. And I want to address the elephant in the room. Most people don't talk about it that much, especially in academia. And of course, especially in our context, maybe in Uganda, and that is mental health. So in most cases, when you're doing your PhD, there are times where you are supposed to meet the deadline. You are supposed to submit a paper. And of course, with those kind of pressure, you always go in isolation, and those isolation always might lead to a burnout, and that can have mental health implications. And always seek for support, seek for help. I always joke with my colleague Conrad and tell him that, if you feel you're mentally tired, first try to go to Uganda, spend some few days, then come back home. Yeah, so it's always good to check on your mental health, always check for support. It is very key for you to check on your mental health, and that can allow you to sorry Diarmuid. Next slide. So there are a couple of things that I learned in my journey, in my PhD journey, and one of the things is humility, understanding that there are still a lot more to learn. Okay, you might be extremely very good in your field of study, but of course, there are always a lot of new knowledge that are being generated every day and every week. So it's always very important to know that there's still a lot to learn, and also try to keep in par with the current knowledge that are being generated. And also, I learned a lot about persistence. In most cases, when you're just starting your PhD, you will have your research questions. And of course, you don't have the research answers. And always it's extremely very hard to get those answers. And if you're not strong enough, and if you're not persistent enough, you might end up giving up. You might end up saying, what, I think I'm done with this. I better go do something else. And of course, it's also important for you to be self-aware. We are all different. And of course, you don't need to compare yourself with others. Some people might consume materials very fast. Some people could spend 10 hours reading maybe 5 or 6 papers, but you might spend, even longer time reading those papers. So it's always very important to know what you're good at, to know the pressure points as well. And also another thing I learned was embracing the feedback. So the feedback can be external. Sometimes you can submit a paper to a conference or you submit a paper to a journal. And of course, you will always get feedback. And of course, in most cases, the external feedback are always negative in most cases. But of course, also you get feedback from your supervisors. And this feedback are always positive or negative. And you will always get a negative feedback. But it's always important to take the negative feedback as an opportunity for you to grow and develop. And also, I learned to celebrate the small wins, okay? Not every achievement is a publication. Sometimes you might have had a breakthrough in developing some kind of a framework, or you have had a breakthrough in developing some kind of a novel methodology. It's always important to celebrate those small wins, because those small wins will always accumulate and will contribute, of course, to the big wins. And the big wins always doesn't come so frequent. It might come once a year or twice a year. So it's always important to celebrate those small wins as you go along through the journey. And of course, I learned about academic independence and accountability. So if you're doing PhD is more like your child, right? So when you have a child, you always take care of the child. And the goal is to ensure that the child matures at some point. So if you have your research topic or research question, you have to take it like a child and ensure that it matures at the end of the PhD. So in conclusion, for me, the way how I take PhD is not just a degree, according to me. PhD is more like a journey. Of course, a journey that has a lot of uncertainty. And that teaches you how to believe in your research questions or your questions, even though the answers are not clear. And of course, in most cases, the answers will always not be clear enough. Yeah. I think this is all from me. I just want to take it back to Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Really inspiring words. We're just finishing up there with the reference list for anyone who would like some of these readings. I can send them also to maybe Olive, who can distribute. Just I might organize a little folder because some of this reading can be very useful. So Dermot, will you just change to the last slide and just to say Webale Muno. Thank you for listening, Asante Nisana. And now we're handing over the reins back to John Baptiste to maybe moderate some questions as we look forward to maybe spending the next 20 or 30 minutes with your questions. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Long, Dr. Briain, Mr. Ekiisa, and Mr. Ocaka, for these insights that you have shared with us. Very, very inspiring, very eye-opening, and motivating as well for those people who are here and are still in the journey. Thank you very much, good people. Now, we are going to use the next few minutes for us to share ideas. Of course, questions are very welcome. But I realized recently that sometimes asking questions is not enough. There are people, when you tell them questions and they don't have a question, they keep quiet. It would also be good to hear other experiences, something that you want to share to improve our understanding of the supervisor-supervisee relationship and making it work. So thank you very much. You'll just put up your hand and then I will select you. You unmute and ask your question or make a comment. If it's a question, I would be glad if it is directed to a specific person so that it doesn't remain hanging in the air. Thank you very much. Let's start with Mr. Raymond Mwesige.
Right. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation, I must say, and it's timely. I have two questions. One, are there certain links that you can link us to? This is directed, I think, to all the presenters, Sheila Diarmuid and the Ocaka. Are there some links?
I'll put the slides up on. I'll put a link to the slides on WhatsApp in a few, to the WhatsApp group in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. I will be grateful for that. Then two. So along the way, I realize it's a lonely journey and a tough one. So some of us have tried, to go around to conferences and places to try to be in touch with the certain key people who have, published in the areas we are researching on. And then along the way, you actually find out that there are more better people at the area that you are working on. There are more better people who have, done projects in that. And when you interact, you get interest. They get interested in what you are doing, and they're like, "Can we be part of your PhD team?" And I mean, it becomes a little bit hard. How do you approach such a scenario? Could it
Can I
be
answer
good
that question?
Could it be good to have more people on the team?
Can I answer that question for you?
Yeah,
actually,
please,
in a
please.
slightly different way, right? One of the things that I know Alfred kind of did mention in a slide about, well, first of all, imposter syndrome as one problem, but one of the things you find, and I remember the day it happened actually for Alfred, I remember when it happened for me, but I didn't realize at the time why it was such an important moment, right? But one day Alfred came in and he said, Kira Barrett is the other supervisor. We have two supervisors with Alfred. And he said to us, I'm after finding a paper that's kind of doing what I've after doing for the last 2 years, and, he was genuinely, upset wasn't the word, but he was worried that he was after spending 2 years doing all this work. And now he found a paper which somebody else had written that was pretty much similar to what he was actually working on. And he was worried about it. And Kira said something that really struck me at the time, and it's something I will use as a supervisor again in the future. She says, "Brilliant, Conrad, Alfred. Brilliant, Alfred. This is brilliant. This is a great moment for you. Now you have found your peers." So it was a point where he found his peers, not in Ireland, not in SETU, but across the world. He now found someone who was researching in the same area as his. So Kira said to him, what you need to do now is start looking at what that person is doing and look at the other people who have been writing or who have been referencing that particular person, because now you've found your peers in the world. And all you have to do now is just deviate your research away from what they're doing into your own niche. So they've you're kind of working in the same general area, and what you now have to do is move away from each other into your own niches. And I thought about it when she said it at the time, and I said, "Shit, I remember exactly the same time." There was a guy who was doing research in Madrid, in the University of King Juan Carlos in Madrid, and he had a paper that was very, very similar to mine. And when I read it first, I was like, "Wow, this is very similar to mine." And I actually went off and I actually went out to that pub that looks over the lake, you know. I don't. There's a pub that looks over Lake Victoria there, and I went out and I had a few drinks, and I don't drink very often because I was really disappointed. I was thinking, sure, I'm after do all this work, and now someone else is in my area. But when I read the paper again, and I read it again, I realized actually it's not quite the same. It's similar, but I now need to take this person seriously and start reading all their papers. And I got everything that person did, and I started reading their papers, and I realized what they were doing wasn't quite what I was doing, but it was very, very similar. And I actually contacted that person and said, "Hi, I'm doing research in the same area," and you know, and to me, I now had somebody who I've never met, except to share a few emails with them. But I feel they were a kind of a kindred spirit that was on the same journey as me, on the same planet. You know, they were in Spain, I was in Uganda. And I think Alfred discovered that as well. And what Kira brought it out for me was that this is actually a seminal moment in your PhD when you find that you're not the world's expert in this area. There's an expert, more expert than you, and now you have to work alongside them in some way with your research, you know, sort of pushing a little bit in a slightly different direction to them, but they're a peer of you now, in your global journey, if you like, on your PhD. So I think that's that one. In terms of people sending you an email saying they want to join your team, really, I think that's up to your supervisor. Supervisor has to be careful as well. They have to protect you as a researcher. And I think it's important as a researcher to be putting regular publications out there. You know, you need to be doing at least one a year, maybe, you know, two every 18 months. And what you're doing is you're actually, you know, it's like the animal who goes along and stakes out their ground. You know, they go to the tree and they urinate on that tree and they urinate on another tree, and they're saying, well, this is my ground, don't be coming into my ground. You're doing that by putting those papers out there. So you're putting those publications out there to say, this is my ground. You know, don't be coming in on my ground. You can read my stuff and you can work alongside my area of research, but this is my ground. If you don't do that, someone else will come in and take your ground, and you'll find that you've done 3 or 4 years work and you haven't been putting out regular publications, and now there's nothing to stake your ground out. Because once you've got the paper out there, you know, you've basically staked it out, because you've said, now I am the person who's doing this particular piece of work. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Briain, for that. We are now taking more questions, but as we wait for the questions to come in, Ms. Olive Chogavire, you need to read a comment by Buba Sanyang on the chat. He's asking about how he can become part of the NEMRA family. You can get in touch with him. Now, Dr. Roengabo had raised some questions on the chat, but I see his hand is up. So I will allow him so that we can hear his voice and get his questions in his own voice. Yes, Dr. Rutash.
Good morning, colleague. Am I getting through?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Yes, I had raised that question because we need to begin to reflect on questions of one, competence on the side of the supervisors and professors in managing diverse doctoral students with different competencies, capacities, challenges, problems. Two, the minimum rules of the game, because the presentations that have been made give me the impression that different students, even in the same department, face different kinds of challenges. But are there minimum rules within universities, at faculty level, at the department level, which define relationships between doctoral students and their mentors, so that you know, for example, that a professor who is supervising a doctoral student must meet this student at least once every month and they discuss progress, and that in the progress report that the student writes or a doctoral candidate writes, there is going to be questions of whether these people have been able to meet 10 times, for instance, last year, and to determine if they have not met, why have they not met? So that in terms of progress assessment, in terms of delivery, in terms of self-assessment on the side of the student or candidate, we are able to see that something is happening or something has gone wrong. Do we also suppose that these professors don't need mental health support? Are there minimum mechanisms in these universities for supporting professors who have gone through their own challenges as well as challenges of mentoring others to also receive mental health support? Or do we take it for granted or assume that it affects only students? Those were the ideas that I thought we should reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rwengabo. Dr. Long, would you love to say something? And
Yeah.
then Briain?
Yeah, excellent set of comments there from Dr. Rukesh. Sorry, am I saying his name right? Rukesh. Yeah, I'll respond to the comment around mental health of supervisors. That's also something that, you know, supports need to be there for all employees in a university. So you have to have student supports and you have to have employee supports. That would be a minimal standard, I would say. I would also say that absolutely there should be minimal rules of the games for to delineate the supervisor-supervisee relationship within a university. So those roles should be very clearly defined by the university at policy level, and then between the supervisee and the supervisor, they also come up with their own modus operatus themselves between them. But absolutely a wider university level policy should be there. Absolutely, all students are different, so every single supervisor will need to respond and adjust to their own students, because life gets in the way of students, whether, you know, how they, you know, they can, you know, have difficulties along the journey. So we all have to be very flexible with our students.
Just to request Dr. Rwengabo to mute. We are getting some
okay, feedback.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that. So yeah, as I was saying, just to be aware that students are very different and that life gets in the way for all of us, student and supervisor. So checks need to be put in place for that. In terms of annual progress reports, I think that is absolutely vital. So to ensure that there's annual progress reports, and it's not just on the student, but it's also on the supervisor to have a sense of accountability to how many supervision meetings were held, how timely was the feedback. So all these questions should also be explored in a progress annual meeting. You know, with a university, with university personnel. So there has to be a sort of accountability structures there between the supervisor and the supervisee. That's my response. I'd also ask maybe Dermot to also join in on this, because Dermot will be able to talk about the progress report structures in SETU in particular. So Dermot, do you want to add anything on our broader structures for that?
Yeah, sure. I actually put it in there on the chat. I was just writing there. So in SETU, basically each PhD candidate is required to do a twice yearly report. So their twice yearly report is in each semester effectively, and there's deadlines around that. They have that report gets submitted to their supervisor. The supervisor then has to the main supervisor works with the supervisory team, and they put together an addendum to that. Part B is actually for the supervisor to report. And one of the key questions in that part of the report is that, is this candidate, can this candidate continue? Are they, are they doing enough to continue? Because you can cut the candidate at any stage, because it's only wasting the university's time if they're not doing the work. So that goes to the registrar's office, and no, it's not the registrar's office. It goes to the graduate studies office, and the graduate studies office record all of those, and they would review the progress reports. At the halfway point, in the past, we used to have students register on the master's register, and they would then have to do a transfer from the master's register to the PhD register after 2 years. That's been changed recently. We have what we call a confirmation viva. So the confirmation viva, basically an external and an internal examiner have to look at it, much like the you would have at the end of the PhD, but it's kind of at the end of the master stage, and they would look at the a report, kind of a mini dissertation, and they would then do a viva and discuss with the candidate what they've been doing and what their expectations are over the final 2 years of their work. And then they will sign off on that student transferring from being a PhD student to being a PhD candidate in their final 2 years. So then as you come near the end, at the 6 months before the end, you have to submit a request to have an external examiner appointed to do the end, so for the viva at the end, and to read the dissertation and to look at the work of the candidate. So in that particular case, say I've sent out the publications that Conrad and Alfred have done to externs to actually look at it, and they will say, yes, I will take on the external role. And we also do the same. We have an internal examiner as well appointed, so they can then take the final stage to conduct the viva and to assess the PhD. But I suppose the main point is, yes, there's regular checkpoints. Every semester there's a checkpoint, and then there's a big checkpoint at the halfway point. And in the meantime, in between of those reports, of course, the candidate is meeting their supervisor on a regular basis. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and can I just add another angle to that question? And this is from my own personal experience as a doctoral student who wasn't doing well in year one. So I wasn't making good progress in year one. And I'm just going to explain the process from a UK university. So I studied my doctorate outside of Ireland. So I was in a UK Russell Group University. So this would have been a highly research focused university. And I wasn't really prepared for my first annual progress report. I didn't understand what the process was. I didn't take it seriously. So I submitted for whatever to show my annual progress. It wasn't enough. They felt it wasn't enough, and they asked me to come back for a repeat meeting 3 months later. However, the meeting 3 months later was very, very different than it had been previously. So it wasn't as collegial as it was the first time. As in the first time, it was I sat in, I met my I sat in with my supervisors, and we spoke to a university panel, and it was all quite collegial. And the end result was that I was told I wasn't making sufficient progress. 3 months later, I was given the opportunity to demonstrate I was making progress, which I was able to do. But how the university approached this was very different than the first time. The second time, they brought me in on my own to discuss my progress, and then they sent me out of the room. They brought my supervisor in to discuss what was going on. They sent her out of the room, and they brought in the second supervisor in to discuss what was going on, and then they sent them out of the room. Then they brought all three of us back in together. I experienced that as extremely difficult and extremely traumatic. But looking back on it now from a bigger angle, what it was doing was it was checking it was a triangulation approach. It was basically saying, okay, we have had a problem here. Where is the problem? Is it the student? Is it the supervisor? Is it our processes? What's going on? And they were all, by the end of that meeting, able to feel satisfied that everything had been done, everything had been put in place, and I was ready to progress into the second year. But that's an example of when things go wrong from an early stage, that it's caught very early, and that it's not just blamed on the students, that they look at there's a bigger picture piece as well, that you look for the supervisor's role in that issue as well, and that it's kind of dealt with early on. So that's I hope that also helps, that we're not all perfect, and that supervision, the journey can have a lot of bumps along the way for some of us, and it's those bumps that make us good supervisors as well, as well as that. So hopefully, Rutash, we've given you a broad response to your comments. So thanks very much. Does anyone else have any more comments or? I'll go back to you,
Thank you, Dr.
Jean-Baptiste.
Long and Dr.
Yeah.
O'Brien. That's a good one.
I really
issue
hope
of
everyone has learned from these insightful responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Utash.
Yeah, the issue of the context and the role of the institutions, because as you rightly said, sometimes it's about the student and the supervisee and the supervisor, but there should be an enabling environment as well. Because even for these documents that Dr. O'Brien has talked about, there are some universities that have them, but they're just documents in passing. There is no system to follow up and say, have you actually filled this form? Did you meet the students? Are you submitting this form to the relevant offices? In some universities, they ask these things only when the student is going to defend or submit their final work at the end of the day. So that's a good one. Now, I have a quick question on the cultural dynamics. How do you balance the cultural issue? And this question could go to Dr. O'Brien because he experienced this, and Mr. Alfred Ocaka, because our cultures are different. Sometimes you have supervisors who come from a different cultural setting, and it takes time to fit in. When I was in Uganda, my supervisors were very formal, always meeting in offices and communicating through emails. Then when I got a fellowship, one of the supervisors was interested in us going to a bar. So he's like, you come, we will discuss this over a glass of beer. And I'm like, how does my supervisor call me to a bar to discuss my doctoral work? So what is your take on this? What can we learn from your experience, Dr. O'Brien and Mr. Chaka, whoever is ready to take on the question?
Yeah, well, Dr.
Can I-
Okello never asked me to go to a bar, I can tell you that. That's for sure. But I mean, first of all, there was differences, because in the case of Dr. Okello, or engineer Dr. Okello, assistant professor Dr. Okello now, she had done her master's in Canada, I think, and her PhD in the US, or the other way around. So she had a very much an American slant on PhD, which is not the same as the slant in Europe. So in the States, when they talk about PhD, it's really not a doctor of philosophy, or it's very much a doctorate of whatever you're doing. So she was doing engineering, so the focus was very much on the engineering side of it. Whereas in Europe, particularly, in Ireland and the UK, there is more of, it has to be wider than just the technical aspect. You're doing a doctorate in philosophy. You're not doing a doctorate in engineering alone. You're doing it in a wider area. So that political economy piece, for example, in my PhD, came from that angle. Whereas Dorothy, had more of a kind of a strict engineering view on the thing. She said it's an engineering doctorate. So I suppose they as a team had to, work that out. Because I felt that initially at the very, very beginning. But once they had their team of 3 meeting and they came together as a meeting of minds, that kind of disappeared, and they had a singular approach to me. And I suppose that's very important. So if you have researchers who are being supervised by more than one supervisor, the cultural difference there you have to really work that out and make sure that there's a common culture to it. Now, the other cultural piece that I had in my PhD was the fact that I wasn't doing it in Ireland. I was doing a PhD in Ireland, but I was actually doing it in Uganda. And if you like, the people who I was interacting with were Tanzanians, Rwandans, Kenyans, Ugandans, right? Because I was going to these places to talk to different people about, like, I'll give you an example. Why do people in Rwanda get their broadband through Kenya into Uganda and into Rwanda, rather than going directly from Dar es Salaam, from Tanzania, directly into Rwanda? It would make sense, you would think, that you would come across one country rather than coming across 2 countries to bring your internet services. But the reason is because, from a business point of view, the business side is much more friendly in Uganda and Kenya, and therefore the Rwandese find it easier to work with 2 countries rather than working with 1 country to get in their internet services internally. So that's a unique problem that Rwanda has in terms of its delivery. Obviously, Uganda has only got 1 hop with Kenya, and would see, it had the option of coming from Dar es Salaam or Mombasa, but they chose the Mombasa route because it's much more friendly. So understanding the culture, not just of Uganda, but also of the other countries in the sub-region that I was working in as well, was a challenge from a cultural point of view. And bearing in mind, I was a white Irish guy going to Rwanda, meeting all these people in Rwanda, talking about the internet in Rwanda, doing the same in Tanzania, Uganda and Kenya as well. So there was lots of different cultural aspects to it. But I suppose the fact that I was living in Uganda and I was teaching and I was working with Ugandan students every day, I suppose gave me a cultural, how would you put it, a cultural shower, if you like, that I actually was embedded within the culture in Uganda from that point of view, was a help. And it was really helpful that, Dorothy Okello was she was really, I couldn't really talk well enough about her. She was such a good supervisor in that she was there for me when I needed her to be there and, to give me the right direction while still being, off you go now, Diarmuid, that's your job. You do that piece. So she was tough enough as well when she needed to be tough, but certainly was supportive when I needed that support. And obviously the cultural piece as well, she was able to bridge that any cultural gap that I had, I was able to get it bridged by her as well. So I'll leave Alfred talk about he's the other way around, or Conrad as well, I suppose. They're the other way around on the subject.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think when it comes to cultural difference, of course, there are a lot of things. And the first one, let's say, for my case, I was from Uganda and we had different culture, different weather altogether. Then you go to a different country, that totally has that different culture as well and different weather as well. So I think for me, what really worked well for me was one that I was lucky enough that my supervisor, Diarmuid, worked in Uganda for a couple of years, okay? And he understood the culture in Uganda as well. And I think, and that really helped me a lot because Diarmuid understood the cultural perspective in Uganda, of course, at the same time, the cultural perspective here. And he did his level best to ensure that I can adapt to the culture this side. But of course, it always takes time. It will not take 1 week or 2 weeks. Sometimes you go for a meeting 5 minutes late. And of course, in Uganda, even though you are late 30 minutes, it's okay. But here, even though 5 minutes late, I think it's a different culture altogether, not acceptable. So you always try to adapt. And of course, you always assimilate in the culture as well. Yeah. So the way I look at cultural difference, I think it's more not a weakness, but I think it's more like a strength. It allows you to see different cultures from different angles and gives you different perspectives of different culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. I see, Conrad, you put your video on. Did you want to say something in relation to this?
You see, the question around the cultural interchange there will always be an interesting one. And when the question was asked, I was having a couple of flashbacks to a number of the differences. There will obviously be differences. For example, for Diarmuid doing his PhD in Uganda, Diarmuid has always told this story as to how he went to a class and he walked into a class and the class was supposed to start at 8 o'clock and no one was in. And the first student arrived at 8:20 or something. The reason being it had rained, and for the life of him, he couldn't understand how that is the reason. And vis-a-vis when you're in Ireland, surely, whether there is a storm or not, that cannot be a reason for you not being in a meeting or being in a class at exactly the time the class is supposed to start. So I think we were a bit fortunate, myself and Alfred, in that we had a supervisor that was not only multicultural but also had specific cultural contexts for us. But just to add on, some of the things we have done on the side between ourselves as the students and Diarmuid is we have had a couple of cultural exchanges every now and then. I would invite Diarmuid, maybe cook him a Ugandan meal and just have a conversation and just chat about what's happening in the country, what experiences, what's going on, and he would do the same as well. Maybe we would attend some sort of Irish event together or something like that. And I think those small occasions or events there really help in having the supervisor and the and the student merge from a cultural perspective and also build a bit of a bond. So that would be my take on that.
Thank you all. Vincent, is your question different from the one that Dr. Briain answered on the chat? If it's different, then I'll come to you after the person using Resource Center. Who is using Resource Center?
Fred.
Yes, please go ahead with your question.
First of all, I want to thank you, the participants, panelists, Dr. Diarmuid, Sheila, Alfred, and Conrad. I'm a student here at Mutesa Wandera University. So mine is just a concern on how to deal with doubts. It was Alfred who was asking, who talked about that. How to deal with doubt. You know, sometimes you doubt yourself whether is my area of specialty, is it the real area that I'm supposed to attend to? So how do you deal with that? Because it has been a problem to me for some time now. And also another thing is how to get the relevance of the area of specialty. At times you have your own conception about your area of specialty, and other people and the community of friends, colleagues also have their own conception. So how do you maneuver with all those conceptions about your area of specialty that you may be in position to deal with it well? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Will you take on that? And Dr. Briain, but then as you handle that, I also request that you handle the question of the number of supervisors. Someone on the chat is asking, is it really important to have 2 supervisors? Sometimes they disorganize your work. They are taking 2 completely different directions and you are torn up in the middle. How do you deal with this? Is it really necessary? So
I'll answer that question first, if you don't mind. I mean, as I told you already in my presentation, there was a team of 3 for my PhD supervision, and you're right insofar as if they are they shouldn't be operating separately. They need to operate as a team. So in SETU we have 2 supervisors for we generally don't have a single supervisor. Now, the 2 supervisors have to work I'm in 2 teams. I have myself and Dr. Yvonne Kavanagh are the supervisors for Conrad, and myself and Dr. Kira Barrett are the supervisors for Alfred, right? But we work together. I mean, I don't do anything. I won't talk to Conrad without I won't talk to Conrad without first having told Yvonne what I'm going to do, and vice versa. She talks to Conrad. We may talk to him individually, but we know what we're talking about, or we will link up again in our team of 2. And it's the same with Kira, and we just had a meeting there with Alfred and Kira during the week, and it's the same thing. We work together as a team. Now, the other advantage of it is, for example, and it has happened in the case of Alfred, there was another guy, Stephen Davey, involved in his supervision early on, and he moved on from the university and went on to a different university. Actually went on to a research group and wasn't really in a position to continue supervising. But I don't think Alfred even noticed, right? Because he got a continuation of supervision from me and Kira coming in. It was pretty seamless, I would think, and he can answer to that himself. But I think that's important as well, that because if a supervisor drops off, say after year 3, and they've been working with someone, it's really hard for another supervisor to come in and just pick up. And also, you may find that the supervisors don't have the individual skill set to deal with exactly what the student is doing, because they're doing something extremely, detailed in their. And you may find that, okay, I really understand 50% of what he's doing, and Kira is the same. She'll have a certain 50% or maybe 60% each, and we cross over. So we have our own skill sets that we bring to the supervision team as well. So that's how I would answer that question. So Alfred, do you want to come in on that one?
Thanks, Dermot. Yeah, no, I'm going to come in with the first question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
Brent raised just there previous around doubt and dealing with uncertainty? I think that was a really, really good question. And it's something that students will experience during the process of this feeling of doubt and uncertainty. But that's actually a sign of intelligence. That's a sign that that you are raising interesting and important questions that you don't have the answer for. If you don't have a sense of doubt during the process, and that if you're 100% sure that you're right and what you're doing is correct and what you're doing is significant, then maybe, that would raise more questions. So we live in very uncertain times. We're living in more and more uncertain times. And so having a sense of doubt and uncertainty, while it's extremely uncomfortable, is actually part of the journey and something that I wouldn't even try to eliminate. So it's about making friends with your doubt. And the second point you made about a question you raised about, the niche area and figuring out, is this even relevant? Sometimes you just have to also realize that when you're doing a PhD, not everyone is aware of your area. Your area of specialization might only be of interest to a very, very small minority of people, namely your supervisor and maybe one or two other people in your university. And then outside of that, people have a general passing interest in you doing a PhD, but it's just at the level of, how are you getting on? Are you nearly finished? Those kind of questions. So you'll often find that you don't get as much interest in your PhD in the early stages until you come to the publishing part, where you connect with your peers and your community and you build that sense of community. So Brent, does that answer your question? You came in under a different name, so I'm not sure if I got your name correctly. So hopefully that has answered your question. Back to Alfred. So to answer the question relating to why we need a number of supervisors, I'll pass that back to Alfred now to just continue on the question that Dermot had answered.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheila.
In half a minute or so.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I want to answer two questions, but I will summarize them. The first one about self-doubt. Of course, that one always you will face that in your early stage, and that's a sign that you have not read enough. And because I remember there was a time when I first started, and I was also having that self-doubt. And I had a chat with my colleague Conrad, and he told me, that is good. That means you have not read enough. That means you need to read more. Yeah, and of course, the more you read, the more your field becomes more clear and clearer. Now, the second question about the reasons for having like two supervisors, I think it's important to have two in a way that each of the supervisors, they have different angles, how they look at things, right? And like for my case, of course, there are a lot of cases where sometimes you submit your paper or you're having a discussion, and both of the supervisors would give you different angles as well. But always, when you combine all the angles, it brings the best out of you. So I think it's all about the different perspectives that is key as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all from me.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rwengabo, what can you do in 20 minutes with that final comment? Dr. Rwengabo?
Thank you very much. I don't have questions. I wanted to add on the important response that Sheila gave about doubt.
Yes, in about
self-doubt. Yes, self-doubt means that one, you are aware that you are entering an important world of research, but two, that you need to read enough. In that regard, you need to ask your main supervisor what the discipline is about. Every discipline or sub-discipline has what you may call micro-foundations. What do mechanical physicists study? What do public health students study? What do political scientists study? What is the subject of sociology? Once you understand the micro-foundations of your sub-discipline or discipline, and you are given the rightful literature to begin with, then all the subsequent literature you read related to your research area will be familiar, because you know the main concepts and theoretical foundations you are dealing with. Then on the question of different supervisors. I think the response was good. You cannot have one supervisor because the supervisor may not have the competence to supervise you and to guide you, but also you need another eye. Ideally, the supervisors should be working as a team. I had 3 of them and all of them were working together as a team. One was a theorist who was from a tradition that was directly opposed to my theoretical persuasion. Another one was a specialist in the discipline. Another one was so they play a complementary role. It's a question of how they work together, how they manage themselves. And again, if there are clear university rules, even if those supervisors would disagree academically or even personally, they can work within those rules to make sure that at least once in a while they interact with you at the same time and you reach minimum consensus so that they give you a guidance that they have all agreed to. Sometimes they even, when you have a draft of your dissertation, they can sit down and generate comments together, and then they give them to you as the supervisory team, even if there are 5 members of the doctoral committee, and you address these issues knowing that you are addressing team issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rengabo. Ladies and gentlemen, the conversation is interesting, but it is not ending with this meeting. We'll continue these conversations. Vincent, your question was answered on the chat by Dr. Briain, who has shared a link of opportunities that are available at SETU. So you can just go back the chat and your question has been dealt with there. I would love to bring this to an end, but I need to invite our head of training at NEMRA, Dr. Gad Ruzaza, to say a word and then allow us go into the weekend. Dr. Ruzaza, the floor is yours, kindly.
All protocol is observed. I very much would like to thank the highly eminent scholars that have presented today. I have seen their profiles and known their details. I also know that they have built a formidable network in the region and beyond, and they are also institutional members to NEMRA. I'd like to extend a cordial invitation that we ensure that we network together with the already formed network. I also earlier on was a member. I don't know how far our membership is of the East African Doctorate Network, but also there is CREST, Stellenbosch Center for Research and Evaluation Science and Technology, where we are interested in collaborating, but as well as also trying to develop country chapters of NEMRA. I am glad and delighted that equally as a young boy who traversed the world in pursuit of knowledge, the minds are coming together to form a knowledge economy, not leaving Africa behind. I am reminded by one of the presenters how Africa became the last to adapt and adopt the internet. When the internet was first opened up to the public, I was a master's student in the UK. It is amazing how much we can achieve when we work together, especially avoiding the notorious challenges and problems that the African continent continues to face, already solved elsewhere. I'd like to thank and salute those who have testified about the arduous journey of a PhD scholar. I'm reminded of a wise religious saying that to whom much is given, much more shall be expected. I now know that the mantle is upon us who hold the high accolades of higher education to lift up those who get differentiated from participating in the knowledge economy, and they are vast in Africa. You know, just like a well-trained soldier, where there is a war front, that's where you go to protect the people. So wherever there are problems, that's where we need to go. Africa should not, we should not carry the blame of the future generations that what did we do? Where were you when these issues were ravaging a continent of a potential? I'd like to salute the leadership of NEMRA for doing something. But more particularly, I'd like to thank you, the organizers of this seminar, NEMRA, but most particularly you, Dr. Imokora, the moderator of the session. And I join the NEMRA ExCom Managing Director, Rutaro, in thanking Princess Chogavirwe for having coordinated this seminar very well. You've set the pace very high. You remind us of the eminent scholar of communication science at Uganda Christian University, Professor Monica Chivita, who also took on a seminar approach. So thank you very much. I salute you. I'd like also to highlight that there will be upcoming events. There is another seminar going to be conducted. We'll put up an announcement thanks to the active NEMRA Advocacy Mobilization Group. And the NEMRA conference, the annual NEMRA conference, is in high gear. I'd like to call upon the NEMRA fraternity that we join together to start the first ever, to launch the first ever multidisciplinary research journal that seems to be in the offing. I would like to end by a wise African saying that if you want to walk fast, walk alone, but if you want to reach far, walk together. And I'd like to thank all of you for the patience, for the participation. All of us have learned and unlearned some things. Keep it up. As someone who respects the deity, I would like to very humbly return all gratitude to the Almighty God. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Imokora. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruzaza. Thank you to our panelists and presenters, Dr. Long, Dr. Briain. Thank you very much, Mr. Alfred Ocaka and Mr. Conrad Ekiisa. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. For all of us who have managed to join, thank you for your time. Thank you for participation. Let's keep the conversation. And as I would like to say, let's use what we have picked from here. Let these workshops actually help us to improve our supervision, improve our relationship with our students, and at the end of the day, have an output in terms of having the students to graduate. For the Muslim friends who are going for their Eid, I wish you a blessed Eid, and for the rest of us, a very blessed weekend, and God bless. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, and thank you very much. God bless.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Now.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.